In this video for biology, we're going to be discussing lactic acid fermentation. This is an anaerobic process, which means this is a process of creating ATP without the use of oxygen. Okay, so as we move along, I want to review a little bit glycolysis. Remember our glucose molecule, that really complicated molecule that we have. We simplified it by using this. And you remember that in order to make pyruvate, in order to break glycolysis up, I first have to invest energy, and I invest 2 adenosine triphosphate molecules, right? So after I invest these 2 molecules, I make 2 G3Ps, and then comes NAD+. This NAD+ is the essential molecule in this process, because you're going to notice that NAD+ kickstarts the production of my 4-ATP that I make in glycolysis. Without NAD+, I don't have this process. Now, in the human body, I have not an unlimited amount of ADP, but I have plenty of ADP to go around, but I don't have plenty of NAD+. Okay, so here I'm making back the 2 ATP that I initially used, and then I am making my gains in 2 new ATP. Now again, this is not a lot of ATP that I produce in this process, but just to go back and to remind you of the importance of NAD+. Again, this is the molecule that kicks off the production of ATP in glycolysis, which occurs in the cytoplasm. I know some of you were asking me about the name. What actually is this molecule? I do have a video, or I will be making a video talking about NAD+ and FAD in more detail. But just for your own knowledge here, you don't have to memorize this name. I just want you to remember NAD+. But you have nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and that's the whole name of this molecule. Okay, again, you don't have to worry about remembering this name, but there it is for your information. So again, the process that I'm discussing right now in this video is anaerobic fermentation. Anaerobic as opposed to aerobic. Aerobic means I'm using oxygen. Anaerobic means I am not using oxygen. And if you remember back to the previous videos, the name of the game for all of this, for cellular respiration, the name of the game is to produce energy via ATP molecules. But in this anaerobic fermentation, I do not have oxygen, okay? So again, I want my glucose molecule to produce pyruvate. That way I can produce ATP. Now, again, I don't make a lot of ATP, I make 4, but in actuality I make a net of 2 ATP. But the most important molecule in this is NAD+, because that's what gets this process started. And in the process of making those precious few ATP to keep the body going, I produce something called lactic acid. Okay, just to take a couple of steps back, why wouldn't I have oxygen in this case? Well, sometimes when you're exercising, let's say you're doing a really extraneous exercise, and you might be running incredibly hard, you might be climbing, lifting weights really hard. You have those moments where you're working so hard that your body, your muscles, they need ATP, they need energy to keep moving. And sometimes the amount of energy that you're using doesn't add up to the amount of oxygen that you have in the body. So you have an oxygen deprivation, or you have an oxygen debt. So your body, in other words, needs oxygen, but you're not able to breathe it in fast enough. That's the reason why after you run really hard, you're huffing and puffing, and you're taking those deep breaths. Is because your body cells are begging you for more oxygen. So your lungs are working overdrive to get more oxygen into the system. Okay, and then you build up lactic acid in the muscles, which cause them to be sore. Okay, so let's continue on. So again, we want pyruvate to turn into lactic acid. Normally pyruvate, if you remember, at this point will now go into your mitochondria. But I remind you, we don't have oxygen, which means we don't go into the mitochondria, which means there's no Krebs cycle. Okay, so that means this process of lactic acid fermentation, this anaerobic fermentation, this process occurs in the cytoplasm. So we never go into the mitochondria. We stay in the cytoplasm for this. So how exactly does NAD, or what exactly does happen when we make pyruvate into lactic acid? So what ends up happening, because I only have a limited amount of NAD plus, and again, without NAD plus, glycolysis doesn't happen. It doesn't make those precious ATPs. So I need to make more NADs, okay? So what will happen is pyruvate will actually oxidize, or it will take the hydrogen atom from NAD plus, because remember, NAD plus has nowhere to go. There has nowhere to go because there's no oxygen in the ETC to accept that electron. It can't go into the mitochondria. So pyruvate, okay, our alternate process, our alternate pathway to producing energy, pyruvate will take that hydrogen ion from NAD, causing NAD to change its charge, because if I'm taking an electron, which is negative charge, now NAD will become a positive charge. So I have NAD plus, okay? And in that process, pyruvate will accept that electron and it will create lactic acid, okay? This lactic acid is a toxin, okay? You actually don't want to make this. And in fact, most of the energy is still stored in this lactic acid molecule. So this is not a very efficient way of producing energy or producing ATP. In fact, after this process, lactic acid goes to the liver to get processed and stored. So when your body does have oxygen, your liver will then convert lactic acid back into pyruvate so it can go into the mitochondria. But if you have a lot of lactic acid that builds up in the muscles, you'll get muscle fatigue, and you'll eventually get cramps as well, especially if you don't have enough ATP. Because remember what we mentioned, one of the functions of ATP is that when the muscles contract, ATP is responsible for allowing the muscles to relax. But if you don't have enough ATP, those muscles will contract, they will stay contracted, and you'll get tetanus. You'll get tetanus, and your muscles will contract and they will cramp up, okay? So where did that hydrogen go from NAD plus? It went over into and attached itself to oxygen in my pyruvate molecule, okay? So again, this is what we wanted to produce with lactic acid fermentation, because now that we have NAD plus, now we can go back into glycolysis, and NAD plus can now continue the process of making more ATP from my 3 carbon molecules. Okay, so again, those were the 2 ATP that I invested, and now here are the ATPs that I make. Oops, sorry, let me go back. Okay, so I produce 4, but in actuality I produce a net of 2, and just to remind you, the name of the game is to produce ATP. In this case, I don't have oxygen, so I can't go into the mitochondria, which I can't produce. I can't go through the Krebs cycle. I can't go through the ETC, where most of my ATP is made. So since I can't do that, I have to go through a process of lactic acid fermentation, which is a process of making ATP without oxygen. Okay? And this process will continue until your body recovers and you're able to catch up on your oxygen debt. Okay? And that's why your body eventually breaks down and says, hey, you got to stop, you catch your breath, and then you're able to move on and keep exercising. Okay, good luck in your studying.